Welcome everyone. We are going to start in a couple minutes. We're going to give people a few minutes to just log in here. Feel free to use the chat box to say hello and introduce yourself. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. This is Lauren Oglesby. I am the coordinator of content communication and programs for AIA New Orleans. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this webinar. This is presented by one of our professional affiliate members, Construction Specialties. And today we're going to hear from Tim Persing on the topic of expansion joint systems and fire barriers. A heads up top about the format. All the attendees will be muted, but you will be able to ask questions through the Q&A box or through the chat box. So be sure to type in your questions there, and Tim will address them at the end of the presentation. We ask that you do not use the raise your hand function. We will also be making a recording of this webinar available afterwards as a resource for you. It will not, just viewing the recording won't make you eligible for a CEU. For this and all our webinars, you have to attend the webinar as it happens live to gain the LU credit. Lastly, we're a two-person team and we don't have the capacity to handle IT issues while we're conducting the webinar. As a backup, if you run into any problems, you can try using the call-in number that was sent to your email. And if you do end up using that call-in number, go ahead and email your name and AIA number to me, Lauren at aianeworleans.org for credit. If you're on your desktop or if you're using the Zoom app on your phone, you don't need to email, we can see your name. That is only for people who are calling in. All right, today on the agenda we have Tim Persing speaking from Construction Specialties. Following that, we'll have a Q&A session using your typed comments. And we'll close out by highlighting some of our upcoming webinars and other resources we've put together for you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tim now. Tim Persing was born and resides in Pennsylvania. After earning his bachelor's degree in criminal justice, he entered the 1990 amateur draft and was taken by the Minnesota Twins in the 7th round. He played for 4 years in the Twins minor league system before an injury ended his career. After baseball, he worked for 23 years at Dynamic Surface Applications, formerly Prismo and Lafarge Road Marking, where he installed bridge expansion joint systems. He held several titles starting as a laborer and became director of operations for the last 10 years of his career there. And in 2015, he took a position at Construction Specialties as a regional sales manager for the Midwest. All right, Tim, it's all yours. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Great, thanks, Lauren. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And I'll get started on the EJC expansion joint presentation.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen there. There you go.
All right. So as Lauren said, I'm Tim Persing. I'm the Territory Sales Manager for the Midwest for Construction Specialties Expansion Joint Cover Systems. This presentation will be on expanded joint cover systems. We are a registered provider. AIA CS is registered with the American Institute of Architects Continuing Education Systems. Credit earned on completion of this program will be reported to CS. Records for AIA members and certificates of completion for non-AIA members are available on request. This program is registered with the AIA CES for continuing professional education. As such, it does not include content that may be deemed or construed to be an approval or endorsement by the AIA of any material of construction or any method or manner of handling, using, distributing, or dealing in any materials or products. Questions related to specific materials, methods, and services will be addressed at the conclusion of this presentation. Course description. The course will provide an understanding of how to determine joint movement requirements and how to size joints properly based on those requirements. It provides an overview of expansion joint cover types that include floor, wall, ceiling, interior, and exterior. We'll discuss fire protection and applicable codes that pertain to expansion joint cover systems. After this presentation, you will understand joint movement and how to size joints properly, different types of expansion joint cover systems that are available and where they are most applicable, testing and code requirements for fire barrier systems, and we'll get into ADA code requirements that apply to expansion joint cover systems. Getting started, joint sizing and movement. We like to talk about expansion joints and where they're going to go very early in the process. So if there's any unique conditions or things like that that we need to talk about in relationship to your projects, we want to talk about them earlier so we know we're not going to have any damage to any of the substrates that they may be going into. If we don't discuss the expansion joint covers and where they're going to go and what type you need, you may have some damage to your building. Obviously, this is a little extreme, but if we don't think about expansion joint covers, there definitely could be some damage to substrates, walls, and things like that. So we definitely want to think about expansion joint covers early in the process. This is an animation of how expansion joint as-built gap should go through the building. It should go entirely through the building, coming in through the exterior, interior, wall, floor, ceiling, and the roof. We shouldn't see expansion joints that go nowhere, so we want to make sure it totally dissects the building. What is an expansion joint cover? An expansion joint cover basically covers the as-built gap, and it allows your building and your finishes to move and perform the way they should, to not let any damage happen to the substrates and let your building move the way it's supposed to. Movement basics. When we talk about different movements that affect the building, your buildings and projects, thermal movement. This type of movement is tension and compression. So if you have the heating up of the day and temperatures go down at night, you'll experience this kind of movement. This is usually more frequent and less damaging. It's not as big, but it happens a lot. Settlement, you might experience this type of movement if you have a existing building and then put on a new addition hooked onto that structure. You might experience settlement where you get some vertical movement up and down. Wind sway, this type of movement will happen with taller buildings. So the higher you go up, it'll affect the building more. So you may see the expansion joint gap starting at 2 inches and maybe increasing to 8 or something like that as it goes up the building because of the effect of the wind on the building. Seismic, this is less frequent, more catastrophic when it happens, and you could have movement in all directions, laterally, vertically, tension and compression, and things like that. So there's expansion joint covers that will address all these different movement types that'll affect your building, and we'll get into all of them as we go through the presentation. Joint movement simplified. I know a lot of times the movement is talked about in percentages. We like to speak about it in inches so everyone knows exactly what the requirements are. It gets a little confusing when it's 25% or 50% or 100%. Sometimes those things mean different things to people. So we want to talk about inches, that way everyone knows if we want to open the 6 inches and close to 2, that you're getting the right product for that application. We also want to avoid 0 when we talk about the minimum joint width. Nominal is what we start at, the as-built gap. Minimum is what we will close down to, and maximum is what we'll open up to. And we want to avoid 0 in the minimum, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get going, but there's a good reason for that, and I'll talk about that. But the biggest thing with this is we want to make sure we know what the movement is and that we're getting the right product for that application. And doing that in inches is a lot better than percentages. Different expansion joint cover systems and cover families. Interior covers, single gasket. These type of covers are usually used in the smaller joints, 1 to 4 inches, and will take up the thermal movement that we talked about earlier. These can be floor, wall, and ceiling. Normally they'll come in 4 or 5 standard colors, but custom colors are available for most manufacturers. So these are easily matched from the floor wall to the ceiling. If you have an acoustical ceiling, there's covers that will handle that type of ceiling as well. Most of these are good with any type of floor finish. So you can always get one of these gasketed covers to match what you have going on in the building. But small movement, normally smaller joint sizes. Here's animation of a floor single gasket cover. This model is recessed, so you can see there's a block out in the concrete. So there are surface mounted models that will go on top of the flooring, and then you have recessed models also where the frames are attached to the substrate through a block out material. So you can just see how the gasket takes up the movement, the tension and compression going on here during thermal movement. Here's some pictures of these types of covers installed in different situations. Like I said, the floor, you can use tile, VCT. Most of these covers will accept any of those finishes. The walls can be matched to whatever color you may have going on and flush out to drywall in some cases, and also you can use them in acoustical or gyp situations on the ceiling. Dual gasket interior covers. When we get into the dual gasket, where you might have a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch of movement with a single gasket, adding a second gasket will increase that to a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Normally dual gaskets will be bigger joints, a little bit larger, so anything over 4, you might want to use a dual gasketed system to allow for more movement. A lot of these models, as you can see underneath the center plate on the left, will incorporate a turn bar system to allow the center plate to stay in the middle, and then the gaskets will take up the movement. Also, there's options where recess can be available to install carpet or vinyl or something like that. So the wall covers can be painted, Kynar finish, different types of finishes like that if you want to as well. We don't recommend painting floor covers because they will eventually get scratched and damaged. So painting on the floor is not usually a good option, but there are different models for most manufacturers, different cover types, stainless steel, bronze, serrated variations of these different covers that you might be able to use in your projects. This is an animation showing how a dual gasketed cover would work and how the turn bar performs underneath, keeping the center plate centered while the gaskets take up the movement that's going on. So it just gives you an idea of how that would work with the turn bar. Few pictures of interior dual gasket covers installed. Again, these are suitable for most floor finishes and wall treatments. Some of them have the option of adding drywall or different things to incorporate with your surrounding substrate, so you get the aesthetic look that you want. Very clean, usually, if done right, minimal sight lines on a lot of them, so more movement with the dual gasketed covers. When we get into aluminum interior covers, normally these will be a little stronger than the gasketed material. So if you have any loading concerns on your projects, you may want to choose a floor cover that is aluminum. Normally these will have a heavier loading capacity. Also, they normally have heavy duty variations of these. So if you get into a situation where you're in a hospital with gurneys or heavy equipment or something like that, or an airport where you may have carts or things like that going over a floor cover, an aluminum cover may be the best option. So as long as we know the loading, things like that, we can come up with a cover. And on the wall cover here is a very clean aluminum metal cover that snaps into place, goes right over the drywall. So these covers, like I said, are a little bit more durable. So if you're in a school, you may not want a gasket where they might be poking pencils through it or something like that. Or if you're in a prison and you want unexposed fasteners, this might be the wall cover that you would choose. And there's a lot of different options like that. This shows you a little bit how this style cover would work. It's a hinged cover, so again, the movement capability on this is sort of small, so you have to make sure you know what movement you have going on. If a cover like this would come apart and fall in, it'd be very hard to repair. You'd have to dig up the concrete and the frames to repair this model here. So knowing what movement you have going on, what kind of loading considerations there are, will help you in picking the right expansion joint cover system. Here you can see a few of these covers installed. The floor cover on the left is in an airport at the top of an escalator. Very clean, going in different directions. Field miters like that, they would be done in the field, so they could cut the systems and go in a different direction. On the wall, you can see that is a wall to corner condition. As with the floor joints, most all expansion joints will have a floor to floor, wall to wall, and wall to corner, floor to wall model that you can use in those type of situations as well. Some more aluminum covers. These are surface mounted threshold covers, like threshold covers, so they would attach on one side and then just slide across the flooring, whatever it might be, when the joint opens and closes. The one on the right actually has a hinge underneath, so this would be a good style cover if you had maybe some differences in elevations on your substrate from one side to the other. That type of cover could take up about an inch of difference in slab heights from side to side. These can also be serrated, like I talked about before, and come in different finishes, but a very clean, durable cover that can be upgraded as well to heavy duty models if you need it. Here's a few of these covers installed, different flooring situations, so you can see they adapt to different types of flooring. Captured center plate interior aluminum covers, again, so these have a captured center plate that would remain in place, and then the frames would slide over the center plate. These types of covers would have a little bit of a bump, so maybe in a hospital situation where you would have equipment or gurneys going over, this might not be the right cover for you to choose. But again, very durable cover, another option that you have to look at. The wall, the same thing. This will flush out to drywall. Center plate will remain in place as the frames move. Again, these can also be painted as well, so you can match any paint that you might have going on the wall cover. This kind of shows you how the captured center plate would work and the frames would slide. A few of these covers installed in different situations. Same thing, like I said, they work with most any kind of finishes that you may have going on in your building as well. When we get to interior seismic covers, this picture on the left is a pan-styled system. So this allows you to infill terrazzo, tile, different things like that at thicker depths. This might be something you would use if you had a high-end project with that type of flooring going in. This will keep your flooring from being damaged in an event. The pan would pop up and the flooring would remain intact, which would save a lot of money in repairs. These would have backer rod and sealant between the pan and the frames, which may need to be replaced in an event. But again, your flooring would be intact, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. Underneath, you can see the drape here. That's actually a fire barrier system, which I'll talk about more as we move on in the presentation, but just wanted you to know that's a fire barrier attached to the pan system. But these models also come in floor, wall, ceiling, so you can incorporate some different types of finishes and match these covers up, but very durable covers for high end. So they might not be good for all projects, but very nice covers that you might have a project that you can use them for. Here you can see how the pan does pop up in an event. And just because this is a seismic cover, a lot of manufacturers will have smaller sizes, 2, 3, 4 inches. So just because it's seismic doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a large expansion joint. And with the way different codes and things like that are changing with fault lines and stuff like that, a lot more areas are seeing or considering seismic movement when they're looking at their projects, because you might have something like that going on. But again, the pan will pop up and it will come back to place once the event's over, and everything will be good with the flooring. Here's a few of these covers installed. The pan system is about 6 foot. A lot of times these types of systems are used in base isolated projects, so these pans can get very big. They're used as moat covers around the building, so these can get super large at times and are used a lot in California. Also, seismic on the wall, you can get different covers to use the wall and ceiling as well. Getting into some exterior covers, this is a rubber and rail system. So these are mechanically fastened. When choosing a cover like this, you have to make sure that the substrates and the building is pretty true going up, because the frames won't bend to be able to fasten them. So you want to make sure you have a good even substrate going up the building. These will have a secondary seal along with the primary seal, which allows water to come off the roof and down the exterior of the building, so you don't have to worry about anything getting into the building. 5 standard colors with these and custom options are also available in this type of system as well. Here you can see how that exterior cover would work, where the primary seal is taking up the movement. These also do get normally some vertical shear or are okay with some shear movement too, depending. So very good cover, watertight with a secondary seal for the exterior of the building. Here you can see one of those covers installed to the right of the mullion. I think this one may have been in Ohio, at Ohio State. They tried to match the metal flakes in the helmet. One thing to consider there is it is a Sanaprene or whatever rubber material, so getting a metal look might be a little bit hard, but there are definitely custom options available from all manufacturers when it comes to the gaskets and doing that to match whatever you have going on. Exterior covers, field miters. When talking to architects about field miters, this is definitely something you want to include in specifications so you don't have what's going on in these pictures happen on your project, where you just get a contractor that comes in and tries to do the miters himself, puts a bunch of goop on there and hopes for the best that there's no leaking in the building. So you want to make sure that we specify factory fabricated field miters. And this is the difference between the two. You can see how good these look, how much better they look, and also you don't have to worry about whether they got enough silicone or whatever sealant they put on there and having damage to your building. So we want to definitely stress getting factory fabricated field miters into the specification. And it's also good to have the same manufacturer doing the exterior and the roof, because when you get into transitions and these miters, things like that, it's normally where there's a lot of problem between if there's two different manufacturers and their products, being able to give you the details and tell you how those transitions are going to work. So it's always good to have one manufacturer, especially in those situations where you have to worry about water getting into your building. So they can tell you how those transitions should be made with confidence, knowing what the materials are. When you get two doing it, they may not know what material is being used by the other, so it's really difficult to do that. And then it'll normally fall back on whoever has the roof as their scope because of the warranty to the roof. So again, very good to have the one manufacturer doing these. Exterior covers, foam covers. This is another option opposed to the rubber and rail system. So if you have some irregularities in your building or something like that, a foam option might be a good choice for you. These normally come in 13 standard colors with custom colors available as well. The two different types of foam are pre-compressed and uncompressed. So the pre-compressed will come already packaged. They cut it loose, stick it in the joint, and away they go. The uncompressed, they'll have to squeeze a little bit to get in there. Normally you see the pre-compressed in most applications. The uncompressed, a lot of times they'll size it a little smaller so it's easier to get in the expansion joint gap, but then you'll get what you see on the right where the ribs spread out a little bit, and eventually it will pull apart from the substrate. With a pre-compressed, you can't do that. It has to be sized pretty precisely for them to get it in, because once you cut it loose, it takes off. So that's the biggest difference between the two foams. The pre-compressed will have more movement capabilities than the uncompressed, and the price will be a little more expensive for the pre-compressed system. But you can see how the ribs on the left are nice and tight on the pre-compressed system. So the biggest thing with that is the movement capability and the price between the two of those foams. There are foams also that are fire rated. So if there's any application where you would need a fire rating and a waterproofing element, you might want to look into one of those types of foams, because they can do both. I see them a lot in interior applications actually, and I'm not really sure why, unless there's a water issue or something, a concern there, there's a lot cheaper fire barriers as opposed to foam that you could use if there's no water considerations or worried about water damage. But another good option. And you can see how these two look very similar next to each other. So it's very easy to mistake one for the other if you don't know what the movement capabilities are. That's one big difference, along with the price, that can let you figure that out. Exterior covers infill. These are ladder style systems. So the big thing with these covers is normally they don't start until about 8 inches, but they allow you to incorporate different types of finish into your system. So glass, terracotta, brick, things like that. Metal cladding can be incorporated into these. The biggest thing you have to worry about with them is the weight. Normally these types of systems can handle about 150 pounds per 10 foot, and they can accommodate a depth of 9/16 of an inch on the material. They can be modified and made for bigger, heavier weights or deeper material in some cases, but normally that's the rule with that, is the weight at 150 pounds. Then you can see the vapor barrier that is behind this cover on the left. So that's kind of like the secondary seal that we saw with the gaskets that'll allow the water to come down off the roof and out the exterior of the building. But very good system, seismic system that, much like the floor pan system that we saw earlier, protects your finishes in an event so there's no damage. And it goes back to a resting place once that's done. In this picture, you can see one of these covers, or maybe you can't. There's one of these covers installed. Very hard to pick out, but if done right, that's kind of the way it should. Did have some glass installed. Another big thing to consider with these is the manufacturer will normally provide the cover, but they won't install whatever infill material might be going in there. So the glazer or the masonry guy, whoever scope that is in, they'll be responsible for putting the material in there. Manufacturer will usually work with them on how to attach that, but in the end, it would be up to them to do that. Here you can see how that cover would work in an event. These usually work with 4 large magnets, normally about 400 or 500 pounds, which keep the door closed. And then in an event, they will be able to open, and then a hook and loop will bring it back to its resting place. But they're very strong magnets. They cannot be pulled open. The door would not be able to be pulled open by itself unless there was an event. I know I get that question a lot, if these can be pulled open. So they can't. Unless there's an event, they'll stay shut, and then they'll come back once the event's over. There again, you can see in this animation how that cover would work, not allowing any damage to the finish, but letting the building move the way it should. Gasketed open air covers. So these types of covers would normally be used in plaza decks or parking decks. They are EPDM covers, so they would come in rolls of different lengths. These are a very good option as opposed to elastomeric concrete. You don't have to worry about any mixing of 3 parts, 2 parts epoxy, adding aggregate, and making sure that the mix is right. So these are a very labor-friendly cover where you don't have to do that and worry about your mix being too wet or too dry and crumbling in the parking deck. You can see there's options for where there's just a joint opening and no block out, and then on the right you can see there's a block out, so this one would be recessed. You can also have surface mounted models of the one on the right if you're in an area where there's no snow or you don't have to worry about anything catching the edge and digging it up. There are also surface mounted models available in the one on the right, but very good cover. EPDM, you basically epoxy the throat of the joint or the recess blockout area, and you roll the cover out, weight it down, and that's about it. So nice cover, nice option to have as opposed to elastomeric concrete. And here you can see how that cover would work. The other good thing about this cover is that the nosing is beveled, and it's a one-piece monolithic system, so you don't have to worry about anything slamming into the edges and breaking it apart, which with elastomeric concrete can be a problem at times. A few of these covers installed. Again, very nice covers, very clean. A great option in your parking deck or plaza applications. Metal open air covers. So where the aluminum covers were stronger and sturdier and in comparison to the gasket, this one would be a cover you might choose if you have a little bit of heavier loading going on a project. Maybe it's a bus depot or a transfer station or something like that. Most of these would be HS20 rated, and they can be beefed up in heavy duty models depending on the loading that you have going on. But these are normally a little bit bigger joints. The rubber gasketed style system for parking decks, most of them only come in a size up to 4 inches. So if you get bigger than that, or you're looking for something a little more substantial, a cover like this would be something that you might want to look at. And this will work on a turn bar system as well, allowing the expansion joint cover to move and the center plate will stay in place. Here's one of those covers installed. I believe this was a bus depot. It's been there quite a while, so it's in pretty good condition. So very heavy duty cover that you may have a use for in some of your projects. Roof covers, bellows styles cover. This is an EPDM tube that has a membrane that will tie into the roofing material with a termination bar. So these covers are watertight by themselves because of the EPDM, so you won't see any vapor barrier or anything underneath them. Very good cover. You might not want to use these in a area where you have snow or a lot of snow or loading that might go on top of these. A metal cover might be a better option. But these are a good watertight cover that ties into most roofing systems to use on the roof of your building. And they can get very large, and they also come in very small sizes as well. You can see how this cover would work under movement. And here's a bellows style cover installed. This is a roof to wall condition. This is a little bit bigger cover, so they can get fairly large, but very, very nice durable cover depending on the application. Aluminum covers, these will be a little bit stronger, like we talked about with the aluminum on the floor earlier. These can also be painted as well, so they'll tie into the roofing membrane also with a termination bar. But you can see how this cover would have a vapor barrier underneath it that would tie into the exterior cover coming up the building to let the water go, as this is not watertight by itself. But very durable cover that can be painted. One thing to know about roof covers, they cannot be walked on in most cases. Most manufacturers can design something if you have a maintenance situation where someone might need to get out there and do something. They can design something to go over the cover or incorporate it with the cover to allow that to happen. But normally they cannot be walked on, either the bellows or the aluminum cover. I get that question a lot on the roof covers. But here you can see again how that system would work with a turn bar. Here's a roof cover, aluminum cover installed. You can see this goes in different directions. They also have splice plates for every 10 feet of cover. Normally you'll have a splice plate, which will allow the cover to contract and expand if it gets hot during the day. So it doesn't pop up and pop off the roof. You have to leave a little bit of space between the two sections. And also, if you're changing directions, you have to leave some space there so the cover can work and not pop up off the roof. So you can see how these covers, even though this may not be seismic cover, whenever you change direction like that, you automatically have some movement in different directions. So it's definitely, you want to make sure what you have going on there when picking out these covers. ADA standards as they relate to expansion joint covers. So basically for every ½ inch of elevation, you need a ¼ inch bevel. Almost all expansion joint covers, or all of them, are ADA compliant. So normally you don't have to worry about that. A lot of times the only issues or questions that I ever get relating to ADA standards are with the foams and the open air gasketed covers, where you might have a heel or something like that going down in the grooves or puncturing the foam. But they are all ADA compliant. You might put a plate or something like that over that, but you really don't need to. They are ADA compliant. And the foams normally are self-adhering to a point, but all the covers, like I said, are ADA compliant. Expansion joint cover systems, fire rating and testing. Why fire barrier is required? It's a life safety issue. Obviously, if we have a fire breakout on one floor, we want it to be contained there. We don't want it going to another floor and spreading throughout the building. So with expansion joint covers, none of them on their own are fire rated. You have to introduce a fire barrier to the assembly to meet your 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour rating, whatever that may be. So the expansion joint covers by themselves will not be rated. And placement of the fire barrier is very important. If we place it in construction that's not rated, it's not going to do us any good. It has to be put in rated construction. So if you're in a floor situation, it's 4.5 inches of concrete and a wall, depending on what the rating is you're looking for, either 1 layer of gyp, 2 layers for 2 hours, and so on. But it must be placed in rated construction. And we have to get it in between this rated construction to make sure we complete the loop so no fire can get around it. You can see here, if it's placed back there and not completing the loop with the rated construction, the fire will go around it. We actually would want to move that fire barrier up, so then we're safe. No fire barrier can get, or fire can get around it, and we're good to go. Different designations when it comes to fire barrier, static versus dynamic. Static would be mineral wool, rocks wool, something like that. This normally wouldn't be used in expansion joint cover assemblies because it doesn't have the movement capabilities. It will have some movement capability, but not as a fire barrier that was designed for expansion joint cover. This will have a D designation, dynamic, which means they are cycle tested 500 times the fire barrier before it is put into the testing chamber. This way they know when it's fatigued, it will perform if a fire does happen to break out. Normally you won't install an expansion joint cover assembly and have a fire break out the next day. It'll happen over time, hopefully not at all, but they want to make sure that this fire barrier can handle the fatigue and still perform the way it should. Rocks wool, mineral wool, things like that will not be able to do that. They could break down over time with the cycling and fall out. So you would be in danger of the building, fire going through the building if you had that type of system installed. Here you can see a testing table and how they would cycle the fire barrier before it would be tested. Again, 500 movement cycles. And then they would place it into the fire barrier testing chamber. On the left, you can see the metal covers on the top, which have thermocouplers attached to them so they can read the temperature. This is to assimilate a metal cover of an expansion joint. So for any expansion joint cover to be fire rated, other than the foam systems, you have to have a minimum thickness of metal over top of the expansion joint cover. So if you have a gasketed system in the wall, normally there'd be stainless steel foil behind that, but you always need metal over top of the expansion joint cover assembly to get the fire rating. Then the metal would have to stay around 280 degrees, so people egressing the building wouldn't have their clothes catch on fire and burn up. But then they would put it in the testing chamber with splices. They would light this thing up to about 2,000 degrees, and the fire barrier would have to remain intact. So this is how they would test that and make sure it was good for the application. Different types of fire barrier, drape versus block. We saw the drape earlier. This is a drape system. So normally this is for larger joints when you get over 4 inches. So 5 and up, you would see a drape style system. The one on the right is a block style system. So for smaller joints, you would probably see that type of system. Both can take different levels of fire rating, just normally the drapes for bigger joints. So you can add lateral shear to these with lateral shear bars, different components if that would be needed. But both very good systems and work for what's needed in different type joints, size joints. Here you can see a testing table, and this is why we want to avoid zero. We talked about this a little bit earlier. There are going to be different components within the expansion joint cover assembly, so it's physically impossible normally to get down to zero with fire barrier, turn bars, vapor barrier, different things that may be incorporated into the expansion joint cover assembly. You just can't get to zero. So the structural engineer, knowing the movement that's going on, would size the joint accordingly so it will be able to move and do what it needed to do with all these components in there. So there's definitely different things going on within the assembly that doesn't allow that to happen, to go to zero. Selecting a cover, one of the biggest things in selecting a cover is the building type. So if we're in a hospital, an airport, a school, the building will tell you a lot about what cover you might need. So if you're in a hospital or an airport and you might have some equipment going over top of the cover, you'd want to choose something that's a little stronger, maybe the aluminum hinge style cover or a heavy duty cover that will accommodate the loading. If you need a fire rating, you would have to incorporate a fire barrier like we talked about to achieve that rating. So you might want to pick a cover like this along with a fire barrier. If you need something that's hygienic and easily cleaned, a gasketed covered system might be appropriate that can be cleaned with soap and water. And if you need moisture protection, you might want to pick a foam style cover or the rubber rail system with the secondary seal. And that concludes the continuing education program. I don't know if anyone had any questions before I move on or not, Lauren, or?
We did have a question in the chat, actually. The question was, if you have metal over the cover in order to achieve required rating, doesn't that metal become the expansion joint cover?
It can. If it's in a, normally it would just be the stainless steel foil in a chase condition. So if you didn't have to worry about anybody walking on it or damaging it, it could be a minimal metal cover. But if it's in a situation where somebody's going to be walking on it, or a little heavy duty application, then you would have to actually use an expansion joint cover. I mean, that is considered a cover, but just depending on how you use it. If you don't have to worry about that, stainless steel foil would be the metal cover on top, yes. Does that answer the question, Lauren, I hope?
I guess we'll find out. Laura, if that did not answer the question, feel free to chime in on the chat again. And if anyone else has questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function.
Okay, so since the AIA portion's over, I'll talk a little bit about construction specialties. Even though I'm doing the expansion joint cover presentation today, construction specialties does offer a wide variety of product lines that can help you on your project. Wall protection, active doors, entrance flooring systems, cubicle curtains, louvers, sunshades. So we do have all those products, and would love to help anyone out that needs any assistance with any of those. You can visit us online at our website. We've just updated our website. So any product information, technical data, details, specifications, they'll all be on there. And myself, you can reach out to myself or David if you need anything in those areas. We'd love to help you out with that if you need something. CS, the big thing with CS is custom solutions. We have a lot of resources available, 5 engineers on staff. So we love unique conditions and designing things for different applications. So we can definitely help you out there. The smaller joints and the easier stuff, we can knock that out of the park too. But any custom solutions that you may need or unique applications, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to help you with any of those. And if we don't have the cover or product that you're looking for, chances are we can design it. A lot of times you won't see all those on our website just because there's so many things, so many different variations that it's hard to put them all on there. But we normally will have stuff like that for you. Some of the fire and testing lab that you saw in the presentation, that is our equipment. So we can test a lot of these things before they go into place and make sure they work. One case study that we had with Hoag Hospital was a seismic retrofit. It had 4-way seismic movement, a 30-inch joint, needed a 2-hour fire rating, and it had to remain operational following event. So this is what we came up with for that situation. And again, we're able to test these things out before they actually go in place. Pretty cool.
Does look like there was a part 2 to that question.
Okay.
And Laura said, I think I misunderstood. You meant that the metal would be below the cover. I understood that it would be on the visible side of the cover.
No, in a gasketed situation, it would be underneath the gasket. Because the gasket is not metal, it would be underneath that. So you would have the gasket, the stainless steel foil, then the fire barrier. If it was that's wall and ceiling. If it was a floor situation, it would be on top of the fire barrier. You just wouldn't have the gasket because it's not a gasked system. But normally, stainless steel foil would only be used in a chase condition. Hopefully, maybe that helps. I mean, you do have to have a minimum amount of metal over the fire barrier. So in a gasket situation, it would be in between the gasket and the fire barrier. The metal would have to be over top of it.
It looks like that answered the question, and David provided his and your contact info.
Oh, great.
So if there's any further follow-up questions,
Sure.
Laura, feel free to reach out to them.
Awesome. Yeah, and moving on to the next slide, this is another case study at Cal Memorial Stadium, another seismic retrofit with four-way movement, 12 inches, hundreds of horizontal to vertical transitions, and safety was a big concern. And this is the concept that we came up with and which was actually used on this project. So you can see we have a lot of things we can do to help you out with anything you guys may need. And again, here's the testing table just showing that model working before it was installed and actually used on the project. So that ends the presentation. Any questions or anything you guys may have, I'd be more than happy to talk to you later or give you a call if needed, me or David. Thanks everybody for joining the presentation, and I hope we all learned something.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. Everyone, if you do have further questions, you can take a look at the chat where Tim and David both have shared their contact info. And we're just going to wrap up here by looking at some of the other upcoming opportunities we have for learning. On the 18th, we have a virtual interviewing workshop. So if you are part of the Young Architects Forum or an associate AIA member, we invite you to that. We also are continuing our storytelling series on the 19th and the 26th with Zach Smith and Kathleen Gordon. We hope you will join us for that. We have a few other resources. We have a members forum on our LinkedIn group. We definitely encourage you to join us there, share resources with each other, start conversations. We have a page of resources related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course we have all of our events and more listed on our website, aianeworleans.org. You can also feel free to reach out to me or Erin, our interim director. Our emails are right here if you would like to contact us about anything. Thank you all so much for being here. Tim and David, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
All right, everybody, take care.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.